Well, he's
All right,
hoping that he
good
can,
morning, Earth.
through
This is Adam
rhetoric,
Sturch,
just
broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on an oil painting butterfly. For anyone paying attention to my Facebook page issues, I am still blocked, page deleted, inaccessible, and I have a screen that says it usually takes a day to check your information. It's now been a week, and it's still the same screen. So I don't know if I'm going to get that back or not, but I'm going to proceed as usual and just save up my files for a progress photo edition with video clips of all my downloaded video clips, so the information won't be quite so cumbersome, and post them all at once if I'm allowed back on. If not, that's what will start my next Facebook page, I suppose. But anyway, I've got the figure drawn in on Butterfly standing here on the ledge. I'm going to do a quick fill on this, and then I am going to hit it with some cadmium yellow mixed in with a little bit of red to make a pretty brilliant orange that will start the next layer of stone highlights. But let's get this guy filled in and started first.
The reality is 60% of the tax breaks in this bill go to people over $220,000. And Amy, one thing to understand, this is so much worse than either the previous George Bush tax cuts or the Trump tax cuts, because those tax cuts were skewed towards the wealthy, but they didn't take away from the working class. This is making the working class worse off and enriching the richest in our society.
What do you say to Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who said this is not a good bill for Americans, but she got what she needed for the people of Alaska? What about these deals that are being cut, both for senators and for Congress members, House members?
Well, it really goes to how you view your role as a member of Congress or a senator. If I were to view my role as I only am going to vote for everything that would benefit Silicon Valley, well, I should be lined up probably the first person to support this bill, because the billionaires in my district are going to do very well. The trillion-dollar corporations are going to do very well. But my view is that I'm not there to just represent the corporations in my district. I'm right there to represent the working and middle class in my district, but I'm there to think about what's going to be good for America. And the reality is the central issue for America is we can't be a nation half prosperous and half in decline and in despair. And so I'm afraid that Lisa Murkowski views her role through parochial interests, and that's how they've gotten some of these holdout senators and some of these holdout members of Congress. But it is a betrayal of people, and it's why the trust in government is so low.
So some are saying the silver lining for Democrats is it could win them the midterm elections, but many are asking, what do the Democrats offer? You have here in New York the state assemblyman, Zoran Mamdani, who has defied all the odds, had 1% name recognition, has now won the Democratic primary against the stalwart Governor Andrew Cuomo. And the significance of what he represented as he talked about sustainability, free buses, childcare, as he talked about what it means to afford to live in the United States, in our case, in New York City. What does he represent to the rest of the country, Congressmember Khanna, to your colleagues in the House?
He represents grassroots activism. He represents seeing people who have been unseen, who are struggling, who have economic discontent. He represents building a coalition around issues of affordability. And the Democratic Party would be wise to have a bold platform going into 2026. That means taxing the wealthy, taxing the billionaires in my district. It means child care $10 a day. It means Medicare for all. It means a real plan to create good jobs in this country, especially when you have AI displacing entry-level jobs. It means 1,000 trade schools and free public college. We need to address the affordability crisis. We need to address the crisis of a lack of good-paying jobs in America, and I call it a new economic patriotism, but the point is that Democrats need a bold economic vision. That, to me, is the biggest lesson of Mamdani, and I think these people who are attacking Mamdani gratuitously are doing so because they fear a new generation that is more in touch with the economic struggles of people, that wants a bolder vision for the party, and frankly, they need to step aside to allow for a new generation.
And what do you say to President Trump, who has threatened to arrest and deport the U.S. citizen Zoran Mamdani?
It's just so un-American. I mean, you know, the remarkable part of America is New York can produce Zoran Mamdani, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Donald Trump. And as different as they are, we usually celebrate in this country the extraordinary multiracial democracy we are. And when Trump is threatened in any way, for him to lash out at people just undermines what this country stands for. And I was so disappointed. You know, I have to mention this. There was a colleague of mine who criticized Mamdani as uncivilized because he ate food with his hands. Now, of course, we eat pizza with our hands and hamburgers with our hands, but that reminded me of the British criticism of Gandhi and Indians and my grandfather, who was fought in India's independence movement, as being uncivilized because of the way they ate. You know, it was America that actually helped India defeat colonialism, and it's sad to see echoes of colonial rhetoric here in the halls of the United States Congress.
Congressmember Ro Khanna, we thank you so much for being with us. Tune in to our July 4th special. I'm Amy Goodman.
Thanks.
2 decades have passed since the American anthropologist Peter First characterized shamanism as a Pangean religion of extreme antiquity, extending at least 50 millennia into our past. In The Ghost Dance, The Origins of Religion, fellow anthropologist Weston LeVar proposed as much, offering elaborate details. Both First and LeVar acknowledged the fundamental importance of the innovative work of R. Gordon Wasson in the formulation of this astonishing insight. Wasson, a banker and pioneering ethnomycologist, devoted his life to documenting the survival of shamanism, to exploring a unified field theory of the connection between shamanic ecstasy and religion. Wasson summarized this revolutionary discovery with disarming simplicity. Shamanism is the convenient name that we give to the religious experience of the Stone Age, and its key is ecstasy, rapture. Fortunately for us, the cult of the entheogen did not die out in prehistory. Shamanism lingered on here and there, reaching as with fingers down the corridors of time into early history. I suggest that it survives to this day in the secret rites of the divine mushrooms in Mesoamerica. Wasson was later to characterize pre- and proto-history, or perhaps more to the point, the pre-literate history of all peoples, as the age of entheogens, which lives on in Amazonia and the remote mountains of Mexico and elsewhere. I have sometimes asked myself whether the unlettered ages, stretching back through eons of time, were not those belonging peculiarly to the entheogens, the age of entheogens. The mysteries of Eleusis began in the unlettered past of the amazing Greek people, then persisted for a few centuries under an hermetic seal of secrecy into an age of glorious letters. The Soma of the Vedic hymns knew its heyday before the Aryans learned their letters, but it disappeared with the coming of the alphabet. Although Iliad conceived of the shamanic use of what he indiscriminately called drugs or narcotics as decadence, as a vulgar substitute for pure trance, we now know this to have been a colossal error, a classic example of failing to see the forest for the trees. With the blinders and tunnel vision characteristic of academic over-specialization, alloyed with prejudice derived from Western society's pharmacological Calvinism, and lacking the most rudimentary knowledge of pharmacology or the history of inebriants, Iliad ham-fistedly described as degenerate use of the sacred plants whose visionary effects were the very essence of shamanism, as vulgar, what Gordon Wasson was to identify 4 years later on the basis of his personal experience with Mazatec.
All right, so that gets the figure roughed in,
as religion pure and simple,
and we'll develop
free
him
of
from
theology,
there.
free of dogmatics, expressing itself in awe and
there.
reverence and in lowered voices,
And
mostly at night,
to start
when people
with.
would gather together to consume the sacred
Now we'll
element.
hit some stonework.
Having experienced ecstasy at first hand on the night of 29 June 1955 in a remote village in the mountains of southern Mexico,
Tripod will cooperate.
Wasson astutely recognized in the humble person of the
That's good
pre-literate
enough.
Mazatec Indian curandera,
Okay,
Maria
yeah,
Sabina,
17 minutes.
the shaman, the focus for the woes and longings of mankind, back through the Stone Age to Siberia. She was religion incarnate. She was the Hierophant, the Thaumaturge, the Psychopompos, in whom the troubles and aspirations of countless generations of the family of mankind had found, were still finding their relief. All this I saw in the light of that one match, in the shadow performance of Maria Sabina. The light of that match seemed to last an eon of time, and then suddenly it was out. While many scholars of early humankind, like Iliad, were made uncomfortable by the Wasson theory, their colleagues of greater vision described therein a skeleton key to unlock the hermetic seal of secrecy, veiling the spiritual world of pre-literate peoples from our sight. To Lévi-Strauss, Wasson's was a revolutionary hypothesis, and Labarre saw in Wasson's work an object lesson to all holistic professional students of man. Labarre explored Wasson's nexus between entheogens and shamanism, and between shamanism and religion in his monumental The Ghost Dance. With the passing years, the Wasson theory has become so widely accepted by specialists as to be considered beyond serious dispute. Shamanism is the earliest manifestation of culture, the shaman the first professional, and precursor of the priest, physician, musician, and every artist alike. Visionary ecstasy is the primal heart and soul of shamanism, and religious revelation, and the use of entheogenic plant sacraments is the most archaic, fundamental, and Pangean, or universal, not to mention effective technique for the induction of shamanic ecstasy. There could be no more appropriate designation for our millenary pre-literate past than the age of entheogens. The symbolic demise of the age of entheogens in Paleogia, or the Old World, occurred at the end of the 4th century of our era, when the Christian Alarics Goths overran the sanctuary at Eleusis, putting an end to an organized mystery religion 2 millennia old, centered on an annual rite in which initiates, or mistai, imbibed the kykion, an entheogenic potion which transformed them into epoptai, who had seen Tahaira, the holy. This momentous event stands as a portentous symbol of the death of ancient religion and the inauguration of the Pharmacratic Inquisition. Although the age of entheogens lived on in Paleogia for perhaps another millennium, the demise of the Eleusinian mysteries tolled its death knell. The Christians' enmity is easy to explain, since they were promulgating a religion in which the core mystery, the Holy Sacrament itself, was conspicuous by its absence, later transmogrified by the smoke and mirrors of the doctrine of transubstantiation into a specious symbol, an inert substance, a placebo entheogen. The imposture would be all too evident to anyone who had known the blessing of ecstasy, who had access to personal religious experiences. Thus, a concerted attack on the use of sacred inebriants was mounted, and the supreme heresy was to presume to have any direct experience of the divine, not mediated by an increasingly corrupt and politicized priesthood. The Pharmacratic Inquisition was the answer of the Catholic Church to the embarrassing fact that it had taken all the religion out of religion, leaving an empty and hollow shell, with no intrinsic value or attraction to humankind, and which could only be maintained by hectoring, guilt-mongering, and plain brute force. While the world was to endure an incredible profusion of pogroms and organized and unorganized inquisitions throughout the millennium aptly characterized as the Dark Ages, directed here against vestiges of pre-Christian pagan philosophy, there against rival faiths like Judaism, Manichaeism, Islam, or the nascent stirrings of science and rationalism, there existed continual and vigorous pressure against ecstatic religions and practitioners of traditional herbal lore. Thus, diviners, healers, and midwives, exponents of the shamanic arts, were dragged to the stake among the Jews, Manichaeans, Muslims, alchemists, political dissidents, epileptics, criminals, harridans, business rivals, and anyone else whose misfortune it was to become a scapegoat for any problem. The witch's garden was plowed under by an evil force, which conceived of human beings as sheep and used their bodies to fuel the fires of ritual purification. By the advent of the 16th century, Europe had been beaten into submission, shamanic ecstasy virtually expunged from the memory of the survivors, and the shamanic pharmacopoeia all but forgotten. The age of entheogens yet lived on in Neogia, or the New World. However, and European seafarers abruptly came face to face with their own pagan heritage, with people having direct experience of the divine, mediated not by ignorant priests, but by a bewildering array of entheogenic plant teachers. Troubled churchmen uneasily saw in this a diabolical parody of their cherished Holy Communion, blissfully unaware of the fact that it was rather their own placebo sacrament that was a decidedly unholy parody of humankind's immemorial communion with sacred plant teachers. We might date the advent of the pharmacratic inquisition in Neo-Geo to 1521, when Cortés' ragtag band of outlaw conquistadores established dominion over the Aztecs, consummate virtuosos of the entheogenic arts and sciences. On 19 June 1620 in Mexico City, the Inquisition formally decreed that use of shamanic inebriants was heretical. It bears witness to the sincerity and integrity of the Mesoamerican Indians that they continued to commune with their traditional sacraments in defiance of this decree, braving torture and hideous execution. Over the next 265 years, there were at least 90 autos de fe for use of peyote or peyote, and numerous autos de fe involving teonanacat, the sacred mushroom, and ololiuki, the holy morning glory seeds. The Inquisition eventually ran out of steam, failing to extirpate the use of plant sacraments in Mexico, but succeeding in driving this underground. Nevertheless, Protestant missionaries have continued the pharmacratic inquisition with undiminished zeal, like their Catholic predecessors, blissfully ignorant of any irony involved. As one missionary noted, and I quote, "The partaking of the divine mushroom poses potential problems in relation to the Christian concept of the Lord's Supper, to say the least." Contemporary prohibition of entheogenic and other psychoactive drugs dates from 1 March 1915, when entered into force the Harrison Narcotic Act. Although the Constitution itself had to be amended to prescribe alcohol, the U.S. Supreme Court in 1919 upheld this federal statute prescribing narcotics and the arrogation of broad federal police powers in the matter of dangerous drugs. The concept has achieved the status of tradition in the United States, which has exported its anti-drug crusade worldwide. And the legislation currently in force, the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970, provides for prescription of any substance the government wishes to add to its schedules. Indeed, the Controlled Substance Analog Enforcement Act of 1986 boldly penetrates into areas of governmental control over research undreamed of by any National Socialist, Communist, or other dictatorship, presuming to declare any, quote, human research with new drugs, unquote, unlawful unless explicitly approved by the government. While the original impetus for anti-drug legislation involved struggles for world dominance, not to mention economics and racism, it triumphed on the tide of reformist zeal of fundamentalist religious minorities intolerant of diversity. Albeit tricked up as public health laws addressing so-called crimes against health, contemporary drug prohibition is merely the modern expression, disguised by secular circumlocutions, of the millennial pharmacratic inquisition. We must not lose sight of the fact that, like the decree of the Spanish Inquisition in Mexico in 1620, contemporary legislation, whatever its justification, has the effect of prohibiting ecstatic experiential religion while simultaneously promoting exsanguinated, desacramentalized simulacra of religion. The secular American state is clearly comfortable with purely symbolic Christian non-religion, but feels rightly threatened by ecstatic religion grounded in individual religious experiences, which lead people to examine their own assumptions and motivations, and those of their churches and those of their governments. The differences between blind obedience and eternal skeptical questioning and distrust of authority. Not only is the pharmacratic inquisition alive and well on the threshold of the new millennium, but it has been enshrined in the secular law of one of the world's most secular states, whose constitution respects individual freedom, and is being used as a pretext, not merely to attack ecstatic religions, but to attack scientific research and the very Bill of Rights to that Constitution, destroying at once religious freedom, scientific freedom, and the juridical guarantees protecting citizens from governmental arrogance and tyranny. In history, as in physics, in the millennial struggle between governmental tyranny and human rights, no action is without an equal and opposite reaction. The reaction to the pharmacratic inquisition was the entheogenic Reformation. I take you to the rainforests of West Africa in present-day Gabon, where in the mid-19th century the Fang people were observed to use an entheogenic plant called iboga, Tabernanthe iboga. In response to Catholic evangelism and Protestant missionary activity, there evolved among the Fang a syncretism between traditional use of iboga and Christianity, of which the most prominent manifestation is Bwiti. As Fernandez noted, we have in the eating of iboga a Eucharistic experience with similarities to Christian communion. Members of Wheatie practice communion employing iboka instead of bread. Some of the more Christian branches speak of iboka as a more perfect and God-given representation of the body of Christ. Wheatie revolves around dynamic reinterpretations of biblical myths, with the story of Adam and Eve, the tree of life, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is, of course, iboga, the Christian Trinity, and the deluge being prominent. Giorgio Sammartini, who will speak here, one of the first outsiders to be initiated fully into Wheatie in Gabon, quoted a remark by a Wheatist establishing the place of Wheatie in the entheogenic Reformation. "We are the true Christians. The Catholics have lost the way that leads you to Christ. The missionaries who offer us their insipid host and ask us to abandon iboga do not know what they are talking about." Could we ask for a more direct statement of the difference between genuine, experiential, ecstatic religion and a watered-down, exsanguinated...
Alright, that's another layer.
It
It needs a lot of work. I want this to be very detailed and
During the
more
French colonial
involved
regime in
with
Gabon, especially from 1920 to
stone
40,
shadows and lights and the figure shadow, and then we'll go back and redo the butterfly. So the edges are crisp with the black and then detail the yellow and shadow and such. But for the moment, I think that's it. So that's Adam Sturch podcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting butterfly. Thanks for watching and have a good day, Earth.
Indeed,